The Harrison family recently moved from New York City to the old town of Lexington, Virginia. They were looking for a quiet, spacious place where their kids could play and grow up. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison conveniently rented an old private house with a large backyard. The deal was quite cheap, but considering how small the town was, it wasn't unusual to rent out a house for only about $1,000 a month, whereas it was triple or rather quadruple for a dingy apartment in New York. It only took about 2 days to tidy the place and redecorate all their furniture, and by the third day, Mrs. Harrison had already started arranging her garden. The Harrison family loved their new home. But a few weeks into living there, they noticed something quite odd about the place. Things that they couldn't find an immediate explanation to. Mr. Harrison was a no-nonsense person. He didn't like too much noise. He didn't tolerate the kids playing in the house or entering his study, touching his things. Mrs. Harrison, on the other hand, was more lenient and a bit superstitious. Ben, I'm telling you, the kids weren't making that noise. It's something else. And indeed, the whole family was witness to strange occurrences in the house. Sometimes they would hear children speaking, as if there were a whole room full of kids in the house. And sometimes they would hear the sounds of whistles or bells from the backyard. Upon searching the house, however, there was never any indication of where the sounds could have possibly been coming from. Mrs. Harrison immediately had the basement and the crawl space of the house checked and cleaned out. Nothing was found there, other than the dirt that had piled up over the years. But it was one day after speaking with her neighbor on the matter that she became quite frightened. Mrs. Roberts lived in the nearest house to theirs, which was 5 minutes away. So how is everything going? It's been long since this house actually got rented out. Really? Do people not want to stay here? Is there something wrong with the house? Not that I know of, or anyone knows of. I've been living here for almost 10 years, and in these 10 years alone, this property had to be rebuilt and renovated 3 times after it caught on fire. Now that's awfully strange. Are there house fires in this neighborhood often? That's the thing. No one knows the cause behind these mysterious fires, but the house has taken on the title of bad luck. But I don't want to scare you off. I heard the engineers who last redesigned the building were cautious about making it fire resistant. I wish you luck. Be careful in there. Well, I've always tried to, but there are some unusual things that go on in there. Like what? Mrs. Harrison told Mrs. Roberts about what she had experienced. To her shock, Mrs. Roberts too mentioned experiencing the same. You must be kidding me. Sometimes I hear it too, as if a whole group of kids are singing songs together. I brought in a spiritualist to cleanse my house. I never expected to be coming from this house. Those fires did take the lives of those innocent families. Sometimes restless souls of the deceased still linger where they once lived. Maybe you should call in a spiritualist and get the house checked out. However, Mr. Harrison always had another logical opinion on the matter. Don't talk to these women. She's nothing but insane, and she's making you more insane than you already are. The woman thought it was her house, for goodness sake. Until she blamed it on this one, and the next thing you know, you'll find out it was just a school bus driving down this route, or a kid riding his bike. Get rid of your superstitions. Maybe you're right. However, Mrs. Harrison became more spooked every time something like this occurred, and so were her kids. So she went out of her way to figure out how to cleanse the house of spirits herself. Liam and Chris had asked to go to a sleepover party at one of their friends' house. Mrs. Harrison allowed them and took the chance to get the work done. She layered salt around the corners of the house. She hung up dream catchers, and lastly, she burnt some sage. And went around the house dispersing the fragrance in her children's room, in the kitchen and living room. This was to ward off any evil entity or soul that lurked in the house. She went to bed that night hoping to expect some sort of change the following day. It was in the middle of the night, however, that Catherine started to feel a little uncomfortable. She felt anxious and soon had trouble breathing. She woke up to an odd smell in the room and was startled to see smoke seeping in from under her door. Catherine wasted no time in running out to the hallway. She creeped down the hall and peered inside the other rooms. She was horrified to see them filled with flames. She began to panic and cried for help. But no one could hear her. Had they left without her? She ran to the corner of the hallway, under the stairs, where she sat, hoping someone would come for her. Suddenly, Catherine started to hear people screaming, "Fire!" She soon heard the sirens of fire trucks rolling onto the yard. The front door burst open moments later. A firefighter ran to her rescue and took her out. She was met by many nurses and officers who surrounded to soothe her. But Catherine was frozen in fear of what she saw inside her house. Some nurses began to speak with her to ask her who else was trapped inside. When I went to their room, I saw they were trapped. They were surrounded by other children in the fire. They were all blocking the windows and the doorway, not allowing them out. When I realized I was there, they all turned around and looked at me. Their faces had turned black like coal, but the whiteness of their eyes were so bright I couldn't recognize them. They were calling me to join them, but I was too scared. I ran under the stairs. Wasting no time at all, the crew entered the burning house, but it was long before the situation could be handled. Mr. and Mrs. Harrison was unable to escape the horrible fate. However, firefighters were bewildered to have found their charred remains still on the bed. Had they not tried to get out of the house? They remembered what the little girl had said and immediately went to confront her. However, when they reached the ambulance, one of the nurses rushed forward in a panic. "Officer, she's gone. I left her on the gurney and went to bring her some blankets, and when I returned, she wasn't there anymore. I think she ran away." The police searched the whole neighborhood for the little girl, but she was nowhere to be seen. They later discovered Mr. and Mrs. Harrison's son were elsewhere and had escaped the horrible accident. They were taken into custody and asked if they knew where their sister could have ran away. The boys wiped their tears and looked at them confused. "Sister? We don't have a sister. It's just Chris, me, Mom, and Dad." The police were muddled by what the brothers said. They immediately pulled up files and records, but they only confirmed the boys' statements. The Harrison family only consisted of Mr. and Mrs. Harris and their two sons, Liam and Chris. They had no daughter. Then who was that little girl? Missing child reports were filed, and the incident, being all too suspicious, led the police to investigate the property. They were aware of previous fires that had occurred there, but to this date, there had never been any survivors. The property was renovated with more precaution and rented out again. The first building, however, that was constructed on the land was in 1947. It was a reform school for certain special students who belonged to certain unwanted families. During that time, a lot of women were taken in with the accusation of being witches. Their families were separated, and those children suspected of being possessed were sent away to the reform school. There were no doubt that the society and even caretakers of the place had their superstitions about these innocent children, so they were often prone to unusual ill treatment, like that of holding burning sage, washing their tongues with salt. Some had even mysteriously passed away. Things went out of hand when the headmaster, the man who had came forth with the idea of letting these orphan children stay at the reform school, to cure them of witchcraft, believing it was evil, decided to take things in his own hands. That was the first ever accidental fire on the property. There were supposedly 20 students there, however, 19 were found that day. Days later, when the authorities were going through the ruins and debris, they found the remains of the missing victim, a 7-year-old girl who had hid under the stairs in fear and was trapped inside the burning house. The police were overawed seeing the images of this cold case. They remembered the girl they had saved that night and looked at the picture of the little girl from 1947. She was the one and the same. They remembered what she said. They were surrounded by other children in the fire. Their faces had turned black like coal, but the whiteness of their eyes were so bright I couldn't recognize them. Could there have been a supernatural presence that caused the fires on the property? Could those children who suffered there and had mysteriously passed away be seeking revenge? Or was she the soul that was finally rescued from the fire nearly 100 years later? However, the biggest question that remained unanswered was why all these years, the residents of that property had never witnessed this child's spirit. It seemed to be that the spirit only appeared to its savior. After the last fire, the property had not been rented out or sold for residential use, until it was finally turned into an orphanage. Since then, the fires had suddenly come to a stop. And oftentimes, the caretakers rumored seeing strange ghostly children running in the halls. Click on the subscribe button and check out more awesome videos on our channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon because you know it's interesting.